What's up everyone, welcome back to Just Finished Coding. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to build a program that will check if a given string is a palindrome. Let's get coding.
Just finished coding.
Now here's a quick preview before we actually get into the code. Now the program says enter in a string and you're going to be able to enter in any string that you want. I'm going to enter in something that's not a palindrome and then here it says nope. On the other hand, if I enter in something that is a palindrome such as I, and then it's going to say yes, which means that the string is a palindrome. So let's go about making this. Now the first thing you want to do is to open up any Python editor of your choice. Now for this video I'm going to be using the PyCharm offline community editor, but if you are more comfortable using another editor such as idle or an online editor, please go ahead and do so. Just make sure that you are aware of all the basic features involved in the program, such as saving it, running it, etc. With that out of the way, let's actually get into the algorithm of how this can be done. Now, first, the program is actually going to be starting with the user entering in a particular string. So the first thing we need to do is to accept the input, and I'm going to do that in a variable called n. Okay, so I'm going to say the n is going to be basically the input right there. So once we actually get the input, the next thing you want to do is to initialize two counters, okay? And counters are basically variables which keep either getting incremented or decremented, and we use those to check something out. And in this case, we're going to be using it to check whether the first letter is equals to the last letter and so on, okay? So what we'd have here is I'm going to call it C and D. Okay, those are the two counters here. C is going to come forwards. On the other hand, D is going to go backwards. Alright, now one thing you need to know is in Python, whenever we have a string like this, right, such as n, what really happens is the n isn't stored like this within the computer, but n is actually stored in a list. And a list is represented in square brackets where you have each of the characters as an item in the list. So in our case, if I think we printed AI, but in case we had n is equals to AI A, then this is how the variable would actually store it inside. So this is really good for the fact that we can actually perform list operations on a string as well. So we'll be using this quite a bit. Now one thing you do need to know about lists is that the first element, like arrays, starts at 0, the second element is 1, the third element is 2, and so on. So while the length of this list or the number of elements in this list may be 3, the last element would be only 2. Alright, with that out of the way, let's actually get into the process. So first, like I said, we need to input a particular string from the user. So as a cue for that, I'm going to print out enter a string, okay? And now the next line of code would be n, or the variable where I'd want to store my string, is equals to the input right there. And this is going to enable the string input to get stored inside this variable n. Like I said earlier, the next thing we want to do is to initialize two counters, and since C is going forward and the first element of the list is indexed as 0, we want to say C is equals to 0, and on the other hand, D is equals to the length of n minus 1. I think I put len right there, so that's len of n minus 1. Okay, and this is really what's going to be it. So if the length of the list is going to be 3, then well, D is going to be 2 right there. And if C is always going to be 0, so that's C. And whatever the length might be, D always would be the last element if we actually run in the line of code. That is, D is equals to length of n minus 1. Alright. So now we've initialized the two variables. Now how do we go about our process? Now for a palindrome, we are actually going to have two different while loops. if the number of letters, okay, or the number of characters within the string is odd, and if the number of characters in the string is even. So first I'm going to factor in if the length of the string is actually odd, and then I'll factor in what if the length of the string is actually even. So my first if scenario would be if length of n modulus 2 is modulus 2, and you can access this by pressing shift in the 5 key. Modulus 2 is not equals to 0. Now in case you don't know about modulus, I'll leave a video linked right here, and this will actually explain what modulus is and the basics of it. So please check that out if you are not even aware of the modulus operator. Alright, so if, okay, I actually made a small mistake, so it's going to be if length of n mod 2 is not equals to 0. And okay, let's get into the if loop now. So within the if, I'm going to have a while loop, and just follow me along right here. I'm just going to explain my code after I code this. So while length of n minus 1, and we want to put this within parentheses, divided by 2 is not equals to c. Okay, and here inside the loop, what I'm going to have is just a pass statement, and now I'm going to have the else statement right here, and now I'm going to have while, okay, c is less than d, and here I'm going to just say pass. Now in case you don't know what the pass does, it basically just says, right now I'm not coding this, I'll code this later on, just make sure that you don't give me any bugs there. Okay, that's basically the pass statement. Alright, so what exactly does this line of code check? Like I said, this checks if the number of characters in a string is actually odd or even. So in this case, we'd actually be programming if the number of letters is odd. And in this case, we're going to be programming it if the number of letters in the string is actually even. So here I have a while loop set up, okay, and here I say while length of n minus 1 divided by 2 is not equals to c, okay. So this seems a little bit complicated. I mean, what exactly are we trying to do here? Now I'll illustrate with the help of this exact same example. So what exactly is going to be the length of n, okay, in this case 3 minus 1, which is 2, and the whole thing divided by 2. That's going to be, well, 1. And you might notice that incidentally here 1 was our middle element, okay, and what this actually is enabling us to do is that it's always going to be able to check which element is the middle element, and if it is an odd number, then basically we'll be able to check in this case repeat until a counter reaches this particular element right here. Now whatever our length might be, as long as n is an odd number, even if n is 5, even if n is 7, right, the length of it minus 1, or what we actually entered in right here, this is always going to equate to the middle element right there. And that is what this statement is actually going to do. And if you do remember, the counter is the variable which is set up from the beginning of the loop, and that's going to go higher and higher, and this is going to check and repeat until the counter is actually going to be at this particular middle index, in which case it's going to stop. Because think about it, our palindrome wouldn't really even matter. The middle index, the middle value in a string isn't actually going to even contribute towards a palindrome. It's always, you know, the pairs of values that contribute, in our case 0 and 2. Okay, so I hope you do understand what I'm trying to say. So in this case, we'll be repeating our process, and I'll get into what the process actually is to check if it's a palindrome. But if the number is even, on the other hand, in which case here, folks, we actually do not have this value right here. So in case we don't have this, then, well, we need to repeat until the value of c is, well, greater than the value of d. So in this case, our counter c would move forwards and d would travel backwards, in which case we'd have to repeat the process just once, and that would really just check if n index C is equals to n index of D. And if it is, then well, we do have a palindrome in our case. But if the string is actually more than 3 characters, like 5 characters, I'm sorry, if it's more than 2 characters, this is an even case scenario. If it's more than 2 characters, like 4 characters or 6 characters, in which case we'll have to perform maybe 2 operations or 3 operations or more depending on the number itself. And what this is actually going to enable us to do is to perform operations until the index from the start is greater than the index from the back, in which case we don't have to repeat our program anymore because we've already checked those case scenarios. I do hope you're understanding what I'm trying to say. Alright, let's get into the process right now. So what we need to check every single time, okay, is if n index of C is not equals to n index of D. Okay. Now you may be thinking, wait, you just said you have to check if they are equal, and you're checking if they are not equal, and that's right. And here, the default assumption that I'm going to go right here is that I'm going to set up a Boolean variable right here called palindrome, and I'm going to be setting it to true. Okay, and if this is the case, if the index from the start is not equals to the index from behind, then this is automatically not going to be a palindrome. So in this case, I'm just going to set the palindrome Boolean variable to be equals to false. Okay, and right after this, outside the if statement, so you have to do this outside, I'm going to increment C by 1 and I'm going to decrement D by 1. So you can do this by saying C plus equals 1 and D minus equals to 1. And the process here is going to be the exact same thing. It's just that our while loop is different. So you want to copy and paste that inside the else statement right there. Okay, so now we actually haven't printed out to the user, although the program does know whether it is a palindrome or not. We haven't really shown the user that we've discovered anything. So right after your else, make sure you add in another if else. So I'm going to say if palindrome, and in this case, this is going to launch in, this is going to go inside the if statement if the palindrome Boolean variable is equivalent to true. Okay, so if palindrome, then we want to print out, yes, it is a palindrome. And if it is not, in which case we'll have an else statement right here, oopsie, else, which is going to print out, it is not a palindrome. There we are. So in most editors, actually, especially if you are running it through the terminal, well, what you might see is that right after this line of code is done, the program automatically exits and the user can barely see the output before the program closes down. And in order to avoid this, you wouldn't have to do this in editors like Idle or PyCharm. But in some certain editors, like the, I'm not going to give examples right here as I'm not aware of. But in some editors, especially where you're running it through the terminal, this could be a bit of a problem. So how we can fix this is just write in a line of code called input. Okay, and this line of code is going to wait for the user until he hits the enter key or once. And if he does hit the enter key after he sees this, then it's automatically going to exit the program. So this might be useful to add in many cases. Okay, so that's it for our program. Let's actually test this out now. So in order to test it in PyCharm, what you need to do is to right click and click around palindrome. And here it says enter in a string. Well, I'm going to enter in something random, which is not a palindrome. And there we are. It is not a palindrome. Now let's do this again. So, oopsie. Yeah, this is what I was saying. So if we hit an enter, the program would actually finish. Okay, so now let's enter in an actual palindrome. So I'm going to say L-A-H-A-H. There we are, it is a palindrome. So our program does work and it does fulfill what we initially wanted it to do. If you've made it this far and you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video and also subscribe to my channel and join the notification squad. That's it for this video, folks. I'll see you in the next one.